I'm Jeff Christensen. I'm the Vice President of Product at Seegrid, and this is a webinar taken here at Modex. So something that I wanted to talk about a little bit is how to get into automation without taking on risk. So quickly, a little bit about Seegrid, who we are, and why you should listen to us about this topic. So Seegrid brings mobile automation to the market with autonomous mobile robots, enterprise software, and customer-first services to give customers a complete, connected, and next-level automation solution today. We've been serving customers for well over 15 years and have over 7 million miles of autonomous travel booked in customer production facilities. So we've seen this before, we know what we're talking about, and what I want to do today is share some experiences with you so you can understand from a customer point of view, how can I get into automation today without taking on a lot of risk? So you may already be familiar with the benefits of automation. It's more reliable, it's more predictable, it has a great financial return, it's far safer than manual-driven solutions. And you may be familiar with some of the common challenges that automation addresses. Labor shortages, ebbs and flows and fluctuating order volumes, things like that. So automation has become a necessity. It's not a nice to have anymore. All of these challenges are stronger today than they have been in the past. So automation is really, truly a question of when and not if for your operation and your organization. So thinking about that, knowing that it is a when, how do you know when? How do you know when to get into the automation game? And what if you are risk averse? I think that a lot of people in the material handling industry aren't looking for the cutting edge or the brand new technology. They're looking for something that is going to solve a business problem for them without introducing a great deal of new risk. So I appreciate that. I'm a technologist myself, so sometimes if you're implementing a new technology, that sounds very exciting, or it sounds scary and risky. So I'm going to speak to those who think the latter today. If you think that sounds risky, but you know you need to make a move in this direction, then that's who I'm speaking to. That's what I want you to hear about a little bit here today. So again, some of those challenges that you are probably experiencing, the fluctuating order volumes, there's really strong ebbs and flows. E-commerce fulfillment is going like gangbusters at exactly the same time that manufacturing is starved for parts and facing shutdowns based on supply chain shortages. So those things are happening right now. The consumer demand that requires automation on the back end in order to fulfill, you have to be better, faster, and cheaper than you've ever been in your operation before. And it's no longer a nice to have, it's not a luxury. Right? What used to be considered a perk on the consumer side is now considered a baseline expectation. Right? Free overnight delivery, have to have it. But the back-end fulfillment of that is extremely challenging. And then of course, labor shortages. We've been experiencing this. We experienced it before the pandemic. We certainly are experiencing it during and after. This means that the conventional levers of hiring more people, throwing people at the problem, just isn't going to work. It just simply isn't going to work because that labor is not available to us. So what are some of the things to consider? So change in this industry is constant, right? And so if you're unsure of where to start, you're not alone at all. In fact, Gartner recently noted, and this is from the lead supply chain analyst, Dwight Clappett, she was noticing that the demand for flexible robotics is extremely high right now, but a problem that companies face is that there are too many options and they just don't know where to start. So if that's the camp that you're thinking that you're in, is that you know you need to get into this, but you're not sure where to start, then you are most definitely not alone. In fact, that is probably the mainstream of the market right now, is seeing all of these options and trying to figure out, how do I get into this game? How do I do that without introducing risk to my operation by making the wrong choice? How do I not over-invest in something that ends up not working for me? So that is something that we do experience in the market all the time. These are the kinds of challenges that we hear from customers all the time. And so I want to offer a straightforward method. And in fact, it is something that is very, very familiar, as it turns out. Sometimes the old becomes new again. So I want to reintroduce you to the Deming cycle. So you're likely doing a version of this already. Plan, do, check, act. It is at the very core of continuous improvement and quality improvement. So this is not new as a process. So the technology of robotics may be new, but the process to adopt a new technology in a low-risk way is very, very old, and in fact very familiar to all of us. So we can now just get back to basics and think about the application of a new technology, in this case mobile robotics, but using a very common, tried and true methodology, the Deming cycle. Plan, do, check, act. Break these things down and follow the data to get you where you want to go. So just to make sure that you are paying attention, I'm going to change the verbs just a little bit. So for plan, I'm going to call that build, as in designing and building what automation application you want to do. Make a plan. It does not have to be difficult. It does not have to be overly comprehensive in the long run. It just needs to be get you out of the starting gates. Figure out what workflows you're interested in, what those things do. Start with observation. So observation is actually the precursor to the Deming cycle of PDCA, right? So observation, what is it that you're doing today? What are the workflows that are being performed today, probably manually, and identify some that are plausible candidates for automation. You don't have to do this yourself. You can do this with an automation vendor that helps you through this to understand what is good proverbial low-hanging fruit. But do the basic observation and define what are some aspects that you want to do. So pick some objectives for that investment. What are your goals in both the short term and the long term, right? So predict maybe where you want to go, but don't hold yourself to that as a hard and fast, because that's going to then constrain your ability to take on risk. So think about it from a stepwise perspective. What can you start with today? And then you can add on from there. So define your measurements of success, and then you'll be able to track those along the way to know if you are deviating from that path. So pick your workflows, observe those things, make a starting point, just make a plan, and start building up from there. And define some metrics as a hypothesis, so then you can be tracking along the way to see how you're doing. So for the risk averse that are out there, I want to note a trap. So there is a trap in the design and build phase as you're moving into automation. And that trap is designing for perfection as opposed to for flexibility. Now, we see this issue all the time. You have a grand vision for how you're going to move from manual material movement into automation, and your eyes start to get bigger and bigger as you're understanding what's possible, what technologies are out there, how mature they are, how we could apply them, and you start to get this very large picture of where you want to go and how big this solution could be. So I want to throw the red flag right there as danger. That is risk that you are dealing with right now. So pull it back. Think about the day one version when you go live, not the day N version when it all becomes perfect. You'll get there, but you have to take small incremental steps and do continuous improvement along the way, and then that is your eventual destination. But you don't start there. We see companies that try to take on too much too fast, and that risk then translates into poor adoption, poor results, and then they sort of think, oh, well, maybe we were just not ready for automation, or we couldn't make it work, or something like that, when in fact, the risk that was taken on early in the process is that they were designing for perfection instead of for flexibility. So consider what you want to get to, but then pull it way back, and know that things will change. Assume that they will change. Assume that whatever design and whatever material flow you want to automate on day one absolutely will change after that. Anticipate that. Don't be surprised by that. Don't be surprised when it doesn't go perfectly on the day after launch or go live. It will not. There will be friction points, there will be bumps in that road. So anticipate those things and design in for flexibility. Now, as you're thinking about this, work with vendors who understand this, who understand that constraint, who understand what flexibility really means when you're looking at automation, who have been there, done that, and can bring those experiences to bear so you don't fall into those traps early in the cycle and start to get your eyes being bigger than your stomach. So think through and work through with your vendor to say, okay, I want to design for flexibility. I know maybe where I want to end up with in the long run, but in the interim, this is where I want to start. And if you're starting to think too big, your vendors should be pulling back and saying, okay, that's great, but let's start here and let's design for change. Let's assume these things are going to change. Let's make sure that you, as the customer, can own that automation and make all of those route changes yourself as situations demand, right? So in fulfillment, you may have, it feels like a year-round peak these days, but there are still ebbs and flows in the seasonal cycles. So if you design your automation for one or the other, either peak or non-peak, and you don't have flexibility built in where you can shift along with that, then one of those is going to suffer. Similarly in manufacturing, your product mix may say one thing in particular, but then demand changes and a line has to change. And does your automation flex with you, or does it work against you when your flows need to change? So be looking at automation, not only that it will solve a goal on that day one, but it is flexible enough to change with you. So as you adapt, it will adapt with you. Now, as you start your project, a good place to start is just evaluate your processes and what workflows you have. And we call that a facility scope. And again, it does not have to be more sophisticated or complicated than that. You start with a plan, right? That's not a radical idea. But just start to draft what it is that you want to do and work with a vendor that can then define what are your financial goals, what are your productivity goals, what are the variables that are important to you? Because maybe it's more throughput, maybe it is fewer safety incidents, maybe it's a faster ROI. There are some different variables there, and so determine what it is that's important to you and then work up from there. And in those facility scopes, you want to evaluate your layout and look for paths of where you can insert automation into your flows. Now, again, on the risk side, you don't have to do a bunch of things that you used to have to do back in previous technology days. You don't have to make any changes to your facility in order to insert automation. You don't have to wait for downtime on your production line to go and install your automation. All of those things can be running. You don't have to worry about, call-outs or workarounds like remote operation. Remote operation is sort of when the automation isn't good enough, then the vendor says, oh, well, we'll joystick it from afar and try to fix it for you. You don't have to do all of those things that are going to end up increasing your risk. They're just not necessary. The technology is there that none of those things are necessary. Real autonomy is there that can drive on its own without requiring remote operation. You can install it while production is running. You don't have to make any facility changes. It's entirely infrastructure free for navigation. All of those things exist in the technology side today. So you don't have to do any of those things. So if you see those things, those are red flags for risk. Pull back and identify, again, what your goals are and make sure that they are aligned with the risks that you are willing to take. I fully understand being risk averse here, but I also understand the pressure that is being applied in supply chain these days that says, I have to get to automation, but I need to do it in a way that, that fits my risk profile. Not just fits my budget, but fits my risk profile. And we really understand that. So intelligent automation really does take those risks out for you. It can do all of those things that 10 or 15 years ago you may have had to do. I have to install infrastructure in my facility, I have to wait for downtime, I have to do all of these things. That doesn't happen anymore. So if it reduces that risk, then it can focus on value. It's not focused on technology. Technology is a means to that end, but it focuses on the value proposition that that technology and the mobile automation can bring to you. So, back to our cycle. I'm going to say that the next step in plan do, I'm going to call do manage. That means that you have now designed your application, you've built it, it's now installed, and you can just bank the ROI and assume adoption is going to happen and it's all great. Well, as you might expect, not quite so fast. So the people that are associated with an automation application are incredibly important. And in fact, it is ironic that the most successful automation applications are the ones that take a people-first approach and understand that the people, as they are interacting with that automation, that they're adopting it, they are building both competence and confidence in this new technology. This is not new, again, not new. This is exactly the same friction points that we have seen for many, many years when any new technology is being inserted into an operation, into an organization, and there's an adoption cycle that has to happen there. People are not really great with change, right? They don't, they say that they like change, but we really don't. So we resist those things. So from an automation perspective, you need to take the people lens, not just the robot and automation lens. So we have a saying that it's automation with an expert human touch, because both of those things really do need to come together and work together. So you don't want to have automation that's just pushed out and just assume that people will celebrate and say, oh, now we're using robots and we have mobile automation and that's fantastic and my job's going to be so much easier. Well, it will be, but we have steps to get there. So adoption, training, enablement of your employees so they can build up that competence and confidence that is essential to adoption. And adoption is a leading indicator toward automation success and therefore toward business success. So one of the things that we tell customers a lot is lean into this people friction point. It does exist, but it is also very, very solvable. If you think about it proactively, if you're working on training, if you're focused on how their jobs will be better, how when they get reallocated to something, it will be something that's of higher value and probably more creative and more satisfying work, that will improve your retention as well as job satisfaction for your employees. So there's a very good news story there, but don't assume that it will happen. You have to take an active role in that and make sure that the people are on board and that competence and confidence is built into how it is that you're approaching this adoption problem. So step 2 of managing or running this application, think about project champions. We often call them champions as opposed to project managers because they are influencing the whole organization. They're taking on the automation initiative. They know the business goals that are being driven here, and they are communicating those both at the site level and at the corporate level, and so they're really taking ownership of the success of the automation. So identify those people early. We found that to be a best practice from the customers who have the best chance of success with automation in this transition from manual. Push to establish trust with the employees that will be interacting with the robots and with the mobile automation and with the software that goes along with that. Don't just assume, don't just throw technology over the proverbial wall and assume all of that is going to happen. Take a people-first mentality for automation to work. Again, there's a certain irony in that, but we have found that to be an absolute best practice for our customers. Support change management along the way. Have a clear process, know what your metrics are, be looking at those early and often, and that will then improve your chances of success and again, lower your risk. So back to our cycle. Stage 3 of our cycle. So plan, do, check. I'm going to call check analyze, meaning harness the power of data. One of the great things about automation is that it generates data just in its normal operational flow. So use that data in order to understand what is happening with your vehicles. A brief aside on the difference between data and information. So if you happen to get banking statements or credit card statements that have long lists of all of these transactions, that doesn't actually tell you what you're doing in spending your money. It doesn't give you insights into that. As a counterexample, if you have an app that collects all of this raw data, maybe from many sources, and then categorizes it for you and gives you insights and suggests actions that you can take, and those actions are aligned with long-term goals that you have, that's information. That is generating knowledge and insight and understanding, which is far more valuable than reams of raw data. So in this analyze phase, we want to be looking at that value-added, insightful information that is going to give you things that you can do, and that the timeliness of that information is within the time frame where you can take action. Meaning that I can understand what's happening with automation right now, and I can take action on it in the middle of this shift in order to then see a change operationally, and then see that back in the data, and I have a very, very tight feedback loop there. So the more timely and the more action-oriented that data is, the more valuable it is, and therefore it's lowering my risk in terms of my chances for success. So it's not just about raw data, it is very much oriented toward gaining knowledge and insights about what's happening in order to make a decision and take an action. That's the end goal of all of those things. Data is not for its own sake. It is to give you information that gives you an insight that helps you make a decision to take an action. And the faster that loop happens, the better off you are. The tighter the loop you get, the more iterations you can do, and therefore the lower risk you have overall. So as we're thinking about these steps, utilize that data, track, measure, monitor, and communicate what's happening with your automation as it's going on. Communicate that success is really critical. Compare your befores and your afters. What sort of operational efficiencies are you getting now? What were you expecting? Is it in line with your predictions? Is it not in line with your predictions? If not, why not? Again, a tight cycle and a tight loop about taking an action and then seeing the result. That's your better chance for success. And that real time, right? So what kind of bottlenecks did you see? Are there areas where you have lower usage of the automation than others? Are there variances across shifts? These things are very common, and you want to have eyes on them through data and through an actionable insight as soon as possible. And when we're talking about taking action, that's the fourth step of the process, right? Plan, do, check, act. So for act, I'm calling that optimize. So take all of the things that you're looking at, take that data, and make a decision and take an action with it. Make a new hypothesis. If I make this change, here is something that I would expect to happen. So drive action through the use of that data. That's why that data is there. It's not there for its own sake. It is there for you to take action with it. Make those decisions confidently and objectively based on the data that you have. That will lower your risk because you are making data-driven decisions. You're doing it based on the reality of what's actually happening out there on the field. And quickly adjust. Remember that timeliness. The timeliness of those actions will lead to greater success and lower risk. Remember, the whole theme here is you need to get into automation. It's a question of when and not if. And so your when is based on lowering your risk. And these steps that you can take will absolutely lower your risk and therefore increase your probabilities of success. So those 4 steps: build, manage, analyze, optimize. Follow those. Those are your individual steps along the way, and every one of them has a piece that you can do that will lower your overall risk. First, understand what your workflows are. Make a plan. Set a success metric so you know how you will know whether you succeed or not. Be able to track that. Once you get into manage, work the people angle, not just the robot angle. You want to make sure that you're driving adoption and building that competence and confidence. And then analyze, get data, but better than that, get information. Get information in a real time so you can then optimize, take action. And then once you get that, if your automation is sufficiently flexible, you jump immediately into a learning loop. Is that once you've seen something, you've learned something, you've taken a decision, you're then taking the action, you go directly back into the build phase to put that action into place, then you're adopting it and you're seeing the result, and that creates a virtuous cycle of continuous improvement. So this Deming cycle is not new. The process is very, very familiar to all of us that are in this industry. We have been doing this for a very long time. This is how we drive continuous quality improvement in other aspects of our business. I'm just suggesting take exactly that approach and apply it now to this relatively new technology. Robotics happens to be a fairly new technology, but this process that is very familiar to us will allow you to take that new technology and adopt it in the lowest risk possible way. And if you do that, and your technology that you have selected is sufficiently flexible that it can change with you and flex with you as your demands change, that its core reliability is good enough. That's obviously a foundation. It has to be good enough to run in your very dynamic environments every day, all the time. And again, the technology is out there. Look for technologies that are proven in the marketplace, that they can do that and be flexible, and then they can be usable and well supported. That personal human angle is not one to overlook, because as we are looking at the arc of automation over time, it truly does drive human progress and improve all of our lives. And that's sort of the name of the game of what automation really can be, and you can be in that game with the low risk path that we've talked about here. Now, we have lots of customers that have taken exactly this build, manage, analyze, optimize path, and they have found that that best practice has suited them very well, and that they have achieved some of their goals. As an example, Guardian Industries, a manufacturer of automotive components, has used exactly this process. They identified some specific goals. They had safety initiatives, 5S. They needed to lower their waste and non-value added work, and the flexible automation was a great solution for them. Now, there are many customers that, again, have used exactly this best practice to get into the automation game without taking on the risk. So that's my lesson for today is automation is when, not if. It is here now. The technology is available, and it does not have to be a risky proposition. You can absolutely get into this and get the business value without taking on that risk.